Welcome back to the BetCanada channel. Katie Caldwell, Jeff Lloyd here with you. This is our division preview series. So today we're going to get into the NFC East. Jeff, are the Eagles the clear favorite in this division? Maybe the Commanders have something to say about that?
To say clear favorite, yeah, I don't know if I would go there.
Yeah.
Is there one clear competitor to the Eagles in this division? I would say that's probably the way I would go with it.
Okay.
Washington, obviously a really, really impressive year one. And we're not talking about Washington yet. We'll get to them, but very,
Mhm.
very impressive year one for the Commanders. But with Philadelphia, look, and I remember the early stages of last year, and well, they really can't get AJ Brown involved. But
Yeah.
yeah, they were winning week in, week out. And it was like, well, it's all gonna find its way eventually. And it certainly did. And then you look at Saquon Barkley, and I think the number was 11 runs counting the playoffs, over 40 yards last year. 11, which is just an absolutely absurd amount. It
Truly.
certainly brought a different element to the Eagles. Like the Eagles were always able to run the ball,
Yeah.
but they just ran with dominance last year. Now, what really probably excites me, and I know we talked about this when we were talking about the AFC, is good teams know when to pull the plug. It's not
Mm.
where, okay, we had to pull a guy in the middle of the season, the younger guy's better. The Eagles just commit to it and roll with it. And that's certainly going to be a case here. They're moved on from Josh Sweat. They moved on from Milton Williams in the interior. The Milton Williams thing, I don't know that that's really going to be that big of a deal. As much as a good player as he was for him, it really is just more snaps, certainly for Jalen Carter, and of course for Jordan Davis. The Georgia boys who are just absolute beasts, of course, for them.
Yeah.
You look, and right now, their first round pick, it was Jahad Campbell. He can play linebacker. I think at
Mhm.
his size, the Eagles may give him edge reps just because I think they're going for the fast approach at edge. Nolan Smith. We saw Joe Lex Hunt last year in the Super Bowl. They're going smaller, faster guys on the edge. And I think looking at Campbell and his body set, I really think they have this universal piece who could, play some linebacker, could play some outside linebacker, could certainly be a pass rusher, not even listed as a starter on their depth chart yet. This is the type of talent the
Unreal.
Eagles have. Their second round pick, Andrew McCumba, safety. Again, not right now necessarily slated to be a starter. You look at the corners, and certainly with two players last year, Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, these guys
Mhm.
just hit the ground and hit the ground running. I think this year for DeJean, there's probably a good case where he's maybe a starting outside corner. Probably plays some nickel, can certainly play some free safety for them.
Yeah.
The Eagles defensively, I think they like depth and diversity. So they draft athletes
Mhm.
who they've seen play more than one position. And, it's obviously a really smart approach to go because God forbids anybody goes down for any amount of time.
Yeah.
You're not just taking somebody and saying, all right, well, sit down, extra time in the film room. We're asking you to learn something new. No, no, no. We're just expanding upon things that you were already learning.
Mhm.
The Eagles, again, they're really comfortable in who they are, what they do, probably have the best offensive line in the NFL. You know, Jalen Hurts, and this is the thing, Jalen Hurts has developed as a passer ton in the years. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody really talks about it because the team is just so overall good
Mhm.
everywhere that it just doesn't really get highlighted enough. And anytime anybody wants to talk about Jalen Hurts, it's usually about the tush push. And it's like, can
Yeah.
we talk about the completion percentage, the efficiency, the lack of turnovers? And, Jalen Hurts is never going to get mentioned probably in the top five quarterbacks, might not get mentioned in the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. But for right now, he is the starting quarterback of the reigning Super Bowl champions. And I don't see any reason why you don't consider that the Eagles are again, the number one contender for the Super Bowl in the NFC.
Yeah, that's bang on, especially about Jalen Hurts. I feel like yet again we walked away from the draft going, Howie Roseman can't keep getting away with this, but they've set themselves up so well, so much depth.
You can see the moves coming 5 and picks away with the
You
Eagles, and you're like,
can,
"Somebody get in there and stop this, snub this, take some."
right?
And then you see good teams like Kansas City trade down with them and give them the opportunity. You know,
It's truly insane.
it's the old stop letting Howie Roseman look as good as he is. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? It's just,
exactly.
it's almost like people just, tee him up to look good.
So let's move into the Commanders then. Jaden Daniels' rookie season was must-see TV, and I love their offseason. They bolstered that offensive line. They added a few weapons for him. Football is fun in Washington right now in the post Dan Snyder era, and I'm just so excited about that. I could see them being pretty sneaky close to the Eagles. How about you?
I think the first thing, and if you're trying to be maybe a Commanders naysayer, and first off, they unveiled that they're going to wear basically the old Redskins jerseys 3 times this year.
Yeah.
And just seeing the makeup of Jaden Daniels in that, it was like, oh my Lord, just absolute perfection.
Yeah.
If you want to be the naysayer to Washington, is there anywhere for Jaden Daniels to go after 1 year, but maybe a dip down in play? Certainly,
Mm.
that would be the naysayer approach. I personally thought that the way they were gonna handle the draft was they were just gonna go and find whatever best running back was available and fit them at that first round pick. And for me, that would have, because they like to run the read option. So imagine how scary that
Yeah.
would have been with maybe an upgrade at the running back position. They went another route. They improved the offensive line, brought in Laramie Tunsil, brought in other players to develop there. The Debo Samuel one is the one where, I like the move because I like the type of ball that Washington plays where, you not necessarily a wide receiver, you can be a running back. Looking at
Yeah.
some of the spring workouts though, I think we all have this belief that Debo Samuel is getting the message from somewhere that maybe it's time to trim down a little bit. It doesn't look like, the message is being received on the
It
part of Debo.
doesn't.
So if he is able to do that, it's certainly a huge, huge asset to this team. And then, the defense and with Dan Quinn, I don't think anybody should have been surprised how quickly the defensive unit came together. And especially when, it was a lot of guys who were free agents and basically said, well,
Yeah.
Dan's got a head coaching job. I know where I'm going. I'm going to go with the guy
Yeah.
who's gotten me this far into my career to this point. So, you look for more excitement from this Washington franchise, and I think they are a lot more palatable to see succeed with new ownership and everything that has now gone on there with Washington. And look, they're just really, really coming together. The question is, again, of course, you are the hunted now as opposed of,
Mhm.
the hunter. And, certainly now it's different when it's expected. And,
Mhm.
that is another thing you're going to have to, deal with. But, Frankie Luvo, Bobby Wagner at your linebacker position, I think these guys combined for like 270 tackles last year. Just, they're really well constructed. I think the Terry McLaren thing is going to get itself figured out. And, they'll get Terry what he needs. He's
He's
absolutely
such a good player.
essential to that offense.
Yeah.
There is no thoughts on moving on from him. I think it's just finding a workable number that works for both parties
Yeah.
while understanding that Terry McLaren, although he has not been in the league a long time, he will turn 30 in September, which is not
Mhm.
odd for a guy who's 6, 7 years in. McLaren came into the league late, obviously, but he is outside of Jaden Daniels, the most important offensive weapon for this Washington
Mhm.
team.
Quick pause. If you haven't subscribed to the BetCanada YouTube channel, you can do so below. It's free and it helps support our channel so we can keep bringing you NFL and NHL content. Now, back to the show. How about the Cowboys? They are coming off a pretty bad season, and now we enter the Brian Schottenheimer era. And one thing that I'm excited about, if I'm a Cowboys fan, CeeDee Lamb finally doesn't have to do it all himself. They bring in George Pickens. What are your thoughts on the Cowboys? Do you kind of have them slotted in number three in this division, or could they be higher than that for you?
I don't know. I guess I mean, I have questions. You moved on when you move on from your head coach, it usually seems like you know who the guy's gonna be. It didn't seem that way for Dallas. It seemed like,
That's
okay,
a good
they
point.
Schottenheimer just happened to be there and enough
Yeah.
guys weren't maybe necessarily interested. And look, it's nice to have somebody familiar with everything. Obviously, you make the gradual, progression promotion to go higher onto the staff. But I don't know if that was necessarily the Cowboys' overall intention when they were deciding that they were going to go with a new head coach. The
Mhm.
Pickens thing is interesting because everybody knows, obviously, that CeeDee Lamb is one of the top receivers in the game. CeeDee
Mhm.
Lamb is going to get the most amount of targets. Here is George Pickens, who the team who drafted him had no intention of, extending him. And, George Pickens, although he can be successful with a lesser amount of targets, which we saw certainly with Pittsburgh, but now it's the money year. And, can he
Mhm.
play the role of, good soldier, which has certainly been an issue with George Pickens to this
Exactly.
point in time. The offensive line has gone through some changes. Some guys maybe moved around, spent yet another first round selection on an offensive lineman on right guard, Tyler Booker. So they
Mhm.
have a nice nucleus young offensive line. Dak is probably one of the more misunderstood quarterbacks in the league because his team is not overall successful. I think Dak Prescott, therefore, is not viewed as good as he actually is. But there's been times certainly, where the team is, had their own downfalls. You look at them on the defensive side of the ball, and Micah Parsons, just one of the more electric guys
Oh,
in
yeah.
the NFL. And, he's about to get his due, and rightfully so. I like the way the secondary looks because, with Trevon Diggs, you're going to get Deron Bland back, who had just a magical, magical 2023 season. The rookie Siobhan Ravel, their corners are all like 6'2", 6'3", 200, long arms. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
opportunity there for turnovers to be created. However, though, with that size, with that length, sometimes you are a victim of maybe shorter, quicker routes. Like Terry McLaren is a difficult guy for these big physical corners to handle, quick in and out of his breaks. They need some players to step up on the defensive side of the ball.
Mhm.
They need more of a complement for Micah Parsons. He just can't do it, on his own, similar to Myles Garrett at times with the Cleveland Browns. It's great that
Right.
you are one of the best individual guys, but there is a reason 11 are out there. I think Dallas is going to sit at 3. It would take, a decent amount of jump from Dallas to maybe contend for number 2 in the division or a wild card,
Mhm.
and it would certainly take a decent descent from Washington to give either Dallas or New York the opportunity to make that jump. I think it's pretty for me, it's pretty set, Philly,
Mm.
then of course Washington, Dallas, and New York has their, questions for me.
They sure do. Well, let's get into New York. To me, they're just in their own bottom tier of this division. Not necessarily a fault of their own, but it's just such a hard division this year. They have a very tough schedule. That stands out for me. They also have a very interesting quarterback room. Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Jackson Dart. Like, first of all, who's going to be the starting quarterback for the Giants? And then who's going to be finishing out the season as the quarterback for the Giants? They just have, like you
And
said, they have so many questions.
when does that transition come? Because look, Russell Wilson wouldn't be there unless Russell Wilson knows he's a starting quarterback. You know, Russell Wilson could have gone anywhere and,
Yeah.
taken a starting job. There were teams, he had a brief flirtation, of course, with the Cleveland Browns. I think he ultimately used the Browns to raise the Giants' expectations, or interest, I should say. You have this scenario where it seems like Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston both wanted to go to New York to basically get the accelerator going on what is going to be their lives, of course, after playing quarterback with the
Yeah.
NFL. I have zero issues with drafting Jackson Dart, but, and I know we spoke about this again on the AFC previews. What does winning 5 or 6 games with Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston do for this team?
That's a great
You
question.
want to see where the development is with Jackson Dart and how close you were there. I will tell you, however, I am infatuated with this New York Giants defense. The adding of Abdul Carter, you have Brian Burns. Of course, you have Tank Lawrence, who's just an absolute beast on the inside. And, they should be able to generate a ton, and I mean an absolute ton of pass rush with this team, the way it is certainly constructed. And, with that, the secondary was good last year. It was one of the more positives, of course, for the Giants. You brought in Paulson Adebo. Javon Holland was the most sought after free agent safety last season.
Yeah.
Tyler Nubin was a rookie last year, played fantastic. Drew Phillips was a rookie last year and certainly played fantastic for this team as well. They are really, really stacked. And the thing, like, you can go to a dime package where you keep Tank Lawrence on the field. You have Brian Burns. You have Abdul Carter. You have Kayvon Thibodeau. And there were just a brief couple of videos from, some OTAs and minicamp where you were like, well, what in the world are you going to do? Because they have basically 3 edge rushers who are all phenomenal athletes, all run basically like 4.4s at 235, 240
Yeah.
plus. That pass rush could be an ultimate difference for New York. And while I like where the offense is, if you have no idea, and there's the old phrase of if you have 3 quarterbacks, you have none. The
Mm,
Giants are going to have to figure out just the way this is going to be, because if Russell struggles in what they're 2-3, then you're going to go to Jameis, who'll have one monster game, and everybody's going to say, "Oh, look at Jameis," and then he'll come back the following week and throw for 187 and 3 picks. And
yeah.
now the Giants all of a sudden at week 7 decided to give the ball to Jackson Dart. and the season may be over. But I mean, the team constructed outside of the quarterback position, I think, is a team that should be considered for the playoffs. But if we do not know who the quarterback is for the New York Giants, that is a major problem to have with a team that is constructed for the playoffs, especially when you're talking about the possibility of a head coach dangling about whether or not he has a future in New York beyond 2025.